Hello everyone, Sidewin here. Today I'm not using my model, quite simply because the class I'm going to be talking about is very complicated, and I wanted the full space of the slides so that I can have multiple things on the same page and connect them together. Today I'm going to be talking about the champion in Pathfinder 2nd Edition at level 1, focusing on holy and unsanctified champions with no attention paid to the evil side. Many of the unholy champions have similar abilities, however, there are certain abilities that they also have access to which are not covered here. The assumption here is that most GMs restrict unholy champions because they are easily disruptive to a party and inherently selfish. So to start with the overview of the class, the champion has expert, fortitude, and will saves while being trained in reflex, reflecting a slight weakness versus reflex-based effects, especially since they're a heavy armor class, so very frequently they're going to increase strength and comparatively dump dexterity. They have automatic access to religion and one skill determined by their deity, as well as 2+ intelligence modifier additional skills. The deity skill depends on which one you select. I'll be talking a little bit about some common options. For armor, the champion is one of only a few classes in the game that have access to light, medium, and heavy armor as well as unarmored defense. They are generally meant to be using the heavier side of this because of their class abilities, which are frequently built around shields and similar. Think like the new Guardian class or a shield fighter. For weapons, the champion has access to simple and martial weapons, as well as a special deity weapon ability. Generally, champions in lore use the weapon of their deity. If that weapon is a simple weapon, the damage dice when that weapon is used by the champion increases by 1. For instance, if the simple weapon deals 1d6 damage, but the champion's using it, then that weapon would deal 1d8 damage. Additionally, if the deity's weapon is an advanced weapon, the champion gets to treat it as a martial weapon for the purposes of proficiency. Then on the side of the overview of the entire class, the champion has a deity, which gives a set of edicts and anathemas. Edicts are things the champion must do, whereas anathemas are things which are abhorrent to the deity and the champion must not do, as well as determining sanctification. Additionally, the champion has a cause, which may be influenced by what type of sanctification they have, and it also gives additional edicts and anathemas, as well as a champion's reaction, which is a reaction-based action of some kind, which varies by what cause the champion's taken. Then the champion has access to devotion spells. These are focus spells, meaning they have the same focus pool as any caster, starting with 1 focus point at level 1. And that focus point can be refreshed in between combats using the refocus action. Access to some devotion spells can be limited by sanctification, as well as, more specifically, the deity's channel at first level. Then the champion gains 1 class feat at first level. They can either select one specific to their cause, of which 4 out of 5 causes have a unique one, or they can select from a general list of feats. Some of these feats are uncommon or rare, so I'll be separating these out when I talk about that. Lastly, the champion is granted the shield block feat, similar to the fighter. This feat allows them to reduce damage with a reaction by holding up their shield. Half of the remainder of that damage is dealt to you as the champion and the shield. This can shatter the shield in some cases. But it's generally best to use shield block for hits which deal lower amounts of damage, rather than using it for high damage attacks, because high damage increases the probability that your shield will crack. At this point, I'm going to move on to talking about deities, auras, and sanctification. So on this list, I have a separation of unsanctified deities who grant no sanctification whatsoever, deities which grant the option to choose holy or unsanctified, with the exception of Iomade, marked with the asterisk, who requires all her paladins to be holy, And then a group of deities, which I call Holy Plus, because you can either be a Holy Sanctified champion or an Unholy champion, with no option for neutrality in a couple of the cases, although you can choose to be Unsanctified with a couple of them. But this is a list of all of the inner sea gods which fall under this criteria. From here, the Holy Sanctification is the focus of a change as opposed to just the default. The default is your Unsanctified, and there's nothing really special to it. It doesn't modify anything. Whereas the Holy Sanctification adds the holy trait to all of your strikes and gives you one edict and one anathema. The edict is do not knowingly harm innocents or fail to prevent harm to an innocent if your direct intervention could save them. So essentially, that's saying do the best you can, but just because you failed to save one person does not necessarily mean you will lose your powers. Because if you fall into anathema, your character very likely will lose their powers. Although sometimes you might need a train of circumstances in which they've committed anathema. The anathema given by the Holy Sanctification is to commit murder. So this term might be defined differently by different GMs, but the best way to think of it is essentially murder is the directed act to harm someone who has done nothing to you. So if you're fighting a group of cultists, then it's not murder to kill them, unless perhaps they're not attacking you. Think self-defense. However, you should always, if playing a Holy Paladin, clarify the definition of that term. And I'll be mentioning this again and again throughout this video, because edicts and anathemas are the basis of the champion class. So you need to be aware of how your GM interprets them, as well as how you interpret them, because that can vary depending on who it is. The second thing I want to mention on this page is the champion's aura. This is used by many other champions' abilities and is projected in a 15-foot radius around the champion. The effects of it are that anyone within the radius knows that the champion serves whatever deity they serve. For instance, if there's a champion of Iomedae projecting their aura, anyone within 15 feet of them knows that they're a champion of Iomedae, and that character cannot pretend to be a champion of anything else. It's just a fact of how they are perceived by the world due to the energy of their aura. The ability has the aura and divine traits, which may interact with certain other abilities. And most of the champion's abilities have a range of the champion's aura. For example, all of the champion's reactions require the enemy which triggers the reaction to be within the champion's aura. Finally, a champion can suppress their aura with a one-action concentrate action, basically. And they can resume it with the same action. So if you are trying to be stealthy as a champion, you can suppress your aura for a span of time and then bring it back. However, while suppressed, your aura does not grant you the ability to use most of your champion's reactions and similar abilities. So you should always be careful when you have it suppressed. Devotion spells are what the champion class calls focus spells. Focus spells in general, as I mentioned before, are essentially renewable in between fights, and you have a pool of points granted by specific abilities you've taken. At first level, you have a point pool of 1 point because you have access to one focus spell. For the champion, these are called devotion spells and may be impacted by champion-specific abilities. At first level, you have a choice of 3 different devotion spells. However, 2 of them require your deity to have either a heal font or a harm font, as mentioned in the slide here. What this means is that champions who serve a deity which has access to both may choose either, but champions whose deity only has one may only choose that one. Pretty much every deity has a heal or a harm font, so you do not need to worry about not having access to either. The devotion spell available to any champion, regardless of the font, is called Shields of the Spirit. It is an ability which grants your allies higher AC when they're within your aura. The way it works is you spend your focus point and raise your shield. Up until the start of your next turn, all allies within your aura gain +1 AC. During that time frame, if any enemies attack your ally, they take 1d4 spirit damage per attack. So if an enemy attacks your allies 5 times, that means that those enemies take 5d4 across however many are doing the attacks. This is a very good ability for a quick boost to AC, especially if you're fighting a higher level enemy, because that +1 AC reduces the chance to hit and crit by 5%. +1s are very important, and you should always pay attention to them. The second devotion spell available is Lay on Hands. It requires you to have the heal font. The way it works is you can either heal willing living targets or harm undead targets. In effect, this means that if you can touch an ally, you can heal them 6 hit points once per combat. If that target isn't you, they gain a +2 status bonus to AC, which means that the ability generally is designed to incentivize usage on others. However, if you instead touch an undead target, it forces them to make a fortitude save with the standard 4 degrees of success, with the failure being half damage, success being full damage. Critical success, you deal double, and on a critical failure, the enemy takes no damage. The damage base is 1d6 vitality damage. And if the target fails or critically fails, they also have a -2 status bonus to AC for 1 round. In general, this could be used to weaken a particularly powerful enemy so that one of your allies can better critical hit them, or even just hit them. The final ability available, Touch of the Void, requires your deity to have a harm font. Most champions who are not unholy will have deities who mainly use heal fonts. However, there are a couple which fall within the harm font and heal font, or just a harm font, even if they are not on the evil side of deities. Most of them are neutral. So the way Touch of the Void works is you can heal willing undead targets for 6 hit points, just like Lay on Hands. However, unlike Lay on Hands, it incentivizes selfish use, because it only grants a +2 status bonus to damage if you are the target. So that means that champions using this Touch of the Void devotion spell generally benefit more if they are themselves undead. So that would be either a Dampier heritage or a skeleton ancestry. There are also undead archetypes, but they aren't really available at level 1. And from that, you can see that it incentivizes evil characters because of the selfish use. The other thing that Touch of the Void can do is harm living targets for 1d6 void damage with the exact same fortitude save and AC penalty as Lay on Hands versus undead. Most of the people watching this video will end up choosing Shields of the Spirit or Lay on Hands, because I doubt that most GMs are allowing the unholy champions unless they're running a game specifically built for it. Like, for instance, the Bloodlords adventure path. This last section of the video is on feats and causes. If a feat is only available to certain causes, it'll be shown on those causes slides rather than on the overall list. I will admit the overall list is slightly cramped just because I wanted it on one slide. I will most likely be posting excerpts of this video for each of the causes so that if you are undecided, you could always just watch through those and see which one appeals to you before watching the entire video, or switching off at this point. If you don't know which cause, you can just watch them all. But if you're only doing one, go to the timestamp or watch the separated out video. I may also be releasing a couple of shorts to promote certain causes. So there are two categories of feats. As I had mentioned before, the common feats, which pretty much every GM will allow, and then the uncommon and rare feats. The uncommon feats in this case, if you're playing in Golarion, are somewhat restricted by your organization. However, if you are not playing Golarion, the rules may be a little different. I'm going to start with the common feats. So the first option for the common feat is called Faithful Steed. It gives you a young animal companion mount who has your sanctification. It follows companion rules as they are detailed elsewhere. The second option is Defensive Advance, which is a 2-action ability. The way it works is it allows you to raise your shield and stride. Together, those 2 actions usually take 2 actions. However, the benefit of a Defensive Advance is if you end your movement next to an enemy, you may make a strike against that enemy. So for instance, if Theala, the iconic paladin, has Defensive Advance, and she is about 20 feet away from an enemy, she can use this, raise her shield, get the bonus +2 to AC, and stride up to that enemy, at which point she can make a strike, essentially condensing free actions down to 2. If you don't really have another one of these options which you want to pick, Defensive Advance is a very easy one to just select. The next option is Deities Domain. This grants you the initial domain spell from one of your deity's domain as a devotion spell. So essentially it gives you an extra one. The initial domain spells are mostly covered under the cleric class, because that's the main form of focus spells available to many clerics. The final common feat is called Desperate Prayer. It's a free action, but only available once per day. The way it works is you immediately gain 1 focus point with that free action. However, that focus point must then be spent to cast a devotion spell before the end of your turn. So you have to choose to do it at a time when you have enough actions available to cast your focus spell, or the effect is wasted. But it can be clutch in desperate moments to, say, grant a status bonus to your allies. It can also let you use 2 focus spells in a single combat, rather than just the usual 1 at level 1. The uncommon and rare options are divided into 2 parts. I'm going to start with the rare option because it's not lore-based. It's called Splinter Faith. It is somewhat less mechanically useful on first sight because it basically just changes your deity statistics. Because you choose 4 domains for your heretical version of your deity's faith. One of those 4 domains can be any domain. It doesn't have to be on either the primary or alternate domains list. These are specific to deities. However, it must be non-anathematic. Basically, if your deity wouldn't actually ever have that domain, like if they have the life domain, you cannot pick the death domain. Or if they have the greed domain, you cannot pick the generosity. It's basically just no complete conflict with the core of who the deity is. The other 2 feats both boil down to a 1-action thing that lets you adjust how you're using your shield as a weapon. They're both from the Knights of Lastwall adventure path, and both have the prerequisite that any character taking it must be a Knight of Lastwall. The first one is Agile Shield Grip. It lets you wield your shield as agile, and reduces the damage dice dealt by the shield by 1. The second one is Everstand Stance, which makes your shield a 2-handed weapon, increases the damage die by 1 step, and the hardness by 2 whenever you use shield block. So essentially, they both boil down to using your shield as a weapon. The majority of champions will not be doing this, but if you do happen to be, you might end up asking your GM if you could take it. At this point, I'm going to move on to the specific causes, and I will be releasing each of these as a separate one. As a note, I will be focusing a little bit on the edicts and anathema because it is, again, core of the champion class, and it can greatly determine whether or not you actually want to play a certain cause, because you don't play a champion unless you're wanting to play a principled warrior following it. The first cause is the Grandeur cause. The Grandeur cause is essentially a classic paladin sort of champion. It is a celestially oriented champion who channels the energy of the heavens upon their enemies. As a Grandeur cause champion, you must obey the edicts. Be a shining example, meaning that you must behave as a very good person to inspire others. The second tenet is you must enjoy and share the beauty around you. So that might be enjoying the arts, admiring nature, and essentially not rushing through life every second and taking time to enjoy the beauty. The last one is the character must keep themselves tidy and well-groomed. So you can't have a Grandeur cause paladin who looks like he just crawled out of a cave unless he literally did. The anathema of the Grandeur cause is to despoil yourself by consorting with fiends and other unholy forces. For instance, consorting with a lich or a devil is a violation of your vow to be a celestial example. As a note, I use the word consorting to emphasize that it's mainly focused on characters who are siding with fiends and unholy forces, and not just talking to them. A paladin tossed into hell who talks with a demon is not necessarily going to be violating their anathema, unless they end up working alongside that demon, particularly for an unholy cause. In many ways, this oath is one of the stricter ones, because it does impose a very specific role-playing ideal, sort of like the Arthurian knight. On the mechanical side, the champion's reaction granted by the Grandeur cause is called Flash of Grandeur. It's triggered when an enemy damages your ally, and both of them are standing within your aura. So it's pretty much only triggered by melee attacks. The effect is that you grant your ally resistance equal to 2 plus your level, so that's free damage at level 1, versus the triggering damage. And then until the end of your next turn, the attacker is affected by the Revealing Light spell. The Revealing Light spell imposes the Dazzled condition, and it reduces an enemy's concealment by 1 step. So if the enemy is invisible, they are then concealed. If they are simply concealed, they are no longer concealed. So it makes them easier to hit. The Grandeur cause also has the opportunity to select a feat called Brilliant Flash. This feat improves your Flash of Grandeur by imposing the off-guard condition upon the target of the ability. This is essentially an ability that benefits your ally and imposes penalties on the enemies. It's particularly strong if you have an ally using sneak attack, because the sneak attack will be triggered by the enemy being off guard or dazzled. It just depends on the specific situation. The Justice cause is a champion devoted to the law above all else. These characters are pretty much, if you're looking in the traditional alignment, on the lawful side, and usually lawful neutral, although some may be considered lawful good. The edicts of the Justice cause are that you must follow the law of the land and respect legitimate authorities. There's some interpretation to be had here. For instance, a lawful good character might consider Cheliaxan authorities illegitimate and not respect them. And the law may also be considered not really the law. For instance, in a devilish city where there isn't really a law, the laws in place might be considered not the law. The anathemas of the justice cause are a little more straightforward. The first one is to take advantage of another. That's basically to do something that would negatively impact them. The other one is to cheat. That one's fairly self-explanatory. The Justice Champion's reaction is called Retributive Strike. The trigger, like for most other champions' reactions, is that the enemy damages your ally when they're both within your aura. The effect of Retributive Strike is the ally gains 2 plus your level resistance at level 1, that is 1, versus the triggering damage. And if the enemy is within your reach, you can make a melee strike against them, including dealing damage. So this works well when you're not the only melee character in the party and when you are close to allies who are also melee characters. The feat available to the Justice Cause, Nimble Reprisal, also gives a bonus to the Retributive Strike. Basically, it allows you to use ranged weapons rather than just melee weapons. And if the enemy is just out of your reach, like for instance if you have 5 feet of reach but they're 10 feet away, it allows you to, as part of the reaction, step over 1 square so that you can attack them. So it essentially gives you an extra 10 feet of range on your Retributive Strike. That movement does not trigger any attacks of opportunity because it is a step. The Liberation Cause for the Paladin is essentially farther from the traditional Paladin ideal and showing Pathfinder's unique champion form of the class. Essentially, the edicts are first and foremost to oppose slavery and tyranny. It's fairly straightforward. Basically, the characters are mortal enemies of Cheliax. The second edict is to fight for others' freedom. This wraps into the first one, but within the full text, it specifies others' freedom to do what they want, as long as it's not harming others. To be clear, that's kind of built in because this is a more good-aligned edict, because the evil examples wouldn't follow the first part. And the final edict is to respect choices that others make for their own lives. Again, as long as they don't harm others. The anathemas are also fairly straightforward. Basically, you can't force or threaten someone to act a certain way. Some GMs may interpret this to mean you can't use intimidation or any actions with the skill in combat. So I do highly recommend having that conversation before playing a Liberator. And secondly, to engage in slavery or tyranny. Again, very straightforward. Most characters will not be engaging in either of those unless they are evil aligned. And the other edicts kind of make it hard to be evil aligned. The champion's reaction available to the Liberator is called Liberating Step. The trigger is that the enemy grabs or restrains your ally within your aura. So this could be a grapple, or it could be a other form of grab. It's just your ally has to be somehow tied up or held. The effect of your reaction is that the ally can reattempt a save versus the effect restraining them, or they can try to escape as a free action. If afterwards they are no longer restrained, the target ally can then step as a free action, meaning they move over 5 feet or 1 square. If the trigger of this ability dealt damage, the ally receives 2 plus your level resistance versus the damage. The Liberator can also take the feat Unimpeded Step, which farther makes Liberating Step more powerful. The effect of Unimpeded Step is that your Liberating Step is unimpeded by any difficult terrain, no matter what form that takes. The Obedience Cause is probably the most evil of the causes covered here. Your character does not have to be unholy to take the obedience cause, but generally it is not the best suited for good campaigns. The edicts of the obedience cause are first and foremost to enforce proper hierarchies. How you define proper hierarchies is somewhat character dependent. For instance, some may consider a dictator who took power after democratic election to be a proper leader. On the other hand, he could be illegitimate, leading to the edict of toppling illegitimate hierarchies. Whenever playing an obedience champion, you have to define what is a proper hierarchy. Is it based on birth? Is it based on popular selection? Is it based on religion? You have to decide that before you or your GM start arguing, because it's very prone to starting that type of fight. Additionally, when you're doing this, you should make sure you talk with your party, because the other party members might not agree with this specific edict. Like, if you're playing in Galarian and you're near, say, a place where the halfling slavery thing is happening, as was more common in 1st edition adventure paths, your halfling party members might not appreciate your character supporting the slave owners. And even worse if you happen to have a liberator champion as your ally. So you should think carefully whether or not this is an appropriate character for campaigns. The third edict is to lead when your character is best suited for leadership. This is another somewhat nebulous edict, but the best way to think of it is if you're the best person to lead, then you should lead. And the anathema kind of enforces that. The anathema is to allow someone who is lesser than you, again, something that can be defined a little bit differently depending on situation, to wield power over you or to lead you. So basically, if you think someone's less than you, you won't follow them. So one example of how this could work out is you could be playing a obedience champion who believes a proper hierarchy is based upon birth. So nobility are above everyone else, and he is a minor nobleman. So this obedience champion would enforce the power of birthright nobility, topple illegitimate nobles, so that could be someone who seized power after a revolt, or maybe a bastard son. It just depends. While at the same time, obeying those higher up. Like if he's a minor nobleman, he would probably obey the duke, or the king, or the emperor. But at the same time, he wouldn't allow those he considers less than him to wield power over him. So, for example, if he is told to do something by a mayor of common birth, he may refuse to do it, quite simply because he considers the mayor less than him by birth. As such, one final reminder, talk with your GM before picking this. And your party. Please talk to the party too. The champion's reaction granted by the obedience cause is called Iron Command. The trigger is that an enemy within the aura damages you. This selfish trigger again indicates that this is closer to the unholy causes than the holy ones. The effect is that enemy who hits you is commanded to kneel. If they do, they fall prone as a free action. And if they refuse, they take 1d6 mental damage. Either way, your strikes will then deal an extra +1 spirit damage versus them until the end of your next turn. So basically, you order them to kneel. If they don't, they get smacked by divine energy, and then you deal a bit of extra damage to them until the end of your next turn. The obedience cause has access to the feat Iron Repercussions, which can choose to make the damage caused by Iron Command persistent. However, you must make this decision before knowing whether or not the enemy will obey your command. You can't make it after realizing that the enemy isn't going to obey. The redemption cause is probably the most complicated one with certain parties. It somewhat leans towards making a pacifist character, or at least a character who restrains themselves from going into combat. This can cause issues in certain campaigns, so it's a cause best suited for black and white campaigns, like fighting a demonic invasion, or an undead attack, or a lich, whereas being somewhat ill-suited for morally gray campaigns, like political intrigue. The edicts of this cause are, first off, to try and redeem those who commit wicked acts. So basically, the assumption is everyone's able to be redeemed, and the redemption champion attempts to live up to that. The second edict is to show compassion to others regardless of their authority or station. So you show as much kindness to the king as you would to a beggar on the street. Basically, it's the goody two-shoes cause. The anathema can be somewhat complicated. It's to kill a sapient enemy, extending the no murder rule of holy champions, unless you had offered them a chance of redemption, which they rejected. So essentially, you can't bring out the blades first. You must offer them a chance to realize they're wrong and redeem themselves. Now, if you know the thing cannot be redeemed, you don't have to. For instance, if it's a demon trying to kill you right then and there, you don't have to offer redemption. But if it's like a bandit or something, you have to offer them the chance to redeem themselves before you can kill them. Technically, you could choose to go with non-lethal damage instead of using lethal weapons as a way of working around this, but it can easily cause conflict with other party members who are less naive, or another way to phrase it is more jaded. The reaction granted by the redemption cause plays into this requirement to offer redemption. Basically, the trigger is if an enemy hurts your ally within your aura range, just like most of the other good champions' reactions. The effect is you force the enemy to either repent of what they did or refuse. If the enemy is mindless or otherwise unable to repent, you still impose the effect of the refuse result. So it's still useful versus undead. If the enemy chooses to repent, your ally takes no damage from the triggering attack. And it's repented. It's the GM's choice somewhat how to run this, but usually the assumption would then be you're no longer fighting them, I would assume, or they're trying to better themselves. However, if the enemy refuses, your ally gains resistance 2 plus your level versus the triggering damage, again, free at level 1. And after the damage is applied, the enemy is enfeebled 2 until the end of their next turn. This reduces most of their abilities. And at this point, as a GM, I would usually say that since they refused their chance to glimpse redemption, your anathema is settled. You can kill them because they refused. At this point, I've talked about all of the different options for causes available to the champion. As said before, I'm going to be breaking this into multiple videos. Thank you for watching. I am sorry this is so darn long.